The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and static, the kind that hums behind glass when too many people pretend not to breathe. I sat at the far end of the conference table, my hands folded on the polished oak. 12 faces, 12 reflections in the dark surface, all waiting for me to speak. It was the kind of morning that left no trace, pale light against the windows, city fog curling between towers, a pulse of distant sirens below. Chicago had that way of feeling detached, as if the skyline itself refused to be moved by human noise. I liked that about it. It suited me. "Claire," someone said, "James, our lead counsel. We're ready when you are." I nodded, checking the final slide on my laptop. The merger numbers glowed in cool blue, clean, balanced, perfect. It had taken me 9 months to get here. 9 months of vetting, recalculating, smoothing egos, managing chaos into symmetry. And now it was done, or should have been. Except my phone was vibrating, persistent, against the edge of the table. "Mom." I silenced it without looking, though a small, private irritation knotted behind my ribs. She never called during work hours, not since I'd explained twice what merger week meant. Still, she found ways, always in moments like this, always when I couldn't answer. The presentation began, my voice calm and unhurried. Words like valuation, synergy, and projection moved easily through my mouth, perfectly enunciated, utterly bloodless. It was the language I'd built my life around: structure, logic, foresight. In this room, I was untouchable. Halfway through, my phone buzzed again, then once more, with the heavy insistence of panic. 5 missed calls, 1 voicemail. 2 texts. The first text: "Claire, call me. It's important." The second: "Don't be angry, honey. We had to make a quick decision." Quick decision. I felt the words like a drop of cold water between my shoulder blades. My voice faltered for half a breath before finding itself again. As you can see, the consolidated revenue stream will exceed expectations within Q3. I continued, steady, detached. On the outside, nothing broke. Inside, everything tilted. By the time the meeting ended and polite applause filled the air, my phone was a storm of notifications. From my mother, from my sister Lily, even from my aunt, who only texted to send prayer emojis or recipes for soup. When the last handshake ended, I stepped into the corridor. The hallway stretched long and mirrored, lined with framed photographs of our architectural partners, glass towers in New York, Dubai, Tokyo, places that looked like reflections of one another. I watched myself move past them, pale blouse, gray skirt, hair pinned neatly at the nape, controlled, composed, but my pulse was sharp in my throat. In the elevator, I finally pressed play on the voicemail. "Claire, honey, don't panic, okay? We just had to, your sister needed a little help with the wedding. And well, you weren't using that account anyway. We'll sort it out later. Don't make this a big deal. Love you." The elevator descended in silence. That account. There was only one account she could mean, the private equity fund I'd set up years ago to stabilize Rowan Analytics during our early years. It wasn't technically family money, though my parents always liked to blur those lines when it suited them. But this was different. I exited the elevator before it hit the lobby, ducking into the stairwell. The concrete walls swallowed the city noise. My fingers trembled as I opened the banking app. The number at the top of the screen was smaller, significantly smaller. I scrolled through transactions. Wire transfers multiple, all within the last 72 hours. Each labeled the same: Event Vendor Deposit, Crescent Ballroom, Floral Design Group. The dates matched my sister's wedding. The wedding I wasn't invited to. Not really. Not officially. They had used my company's stabilization fund to finance it. I stood there for a long time, one hand braced against the wall, my breath shallow. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief, the way your mind refuses to process a shape that shouldn't exist. Then came something colder, familiar, the low hum of realization. Of course they did. It wasn't the first time they'd taken something. Not money always, sometimes credit, sometimes time, sometimes simply my silence. My mother's voice still echoed in memory. You're just so good with details, Claire. You can handle it. And I always did. Until they believed that meant it was theirs to handle too. That afternoon I didn't go home. I walked the length of Michigan Avenue instead, letting the noise of the city flatten my thoughts into static. Somewhere around Oak Street, I stopped at a coffee shop and opened my laptop, not to write an email, not yet. Just to look. The transfers had come through my father's authorization. He didn't even have access. Not officially. My chest ached with the weight of quiet betrayal. Heavy but unsurprising, like finding a wound you'd forgotten you carried. The part that hurt most wasn't the money. It was how easily they must have justified it. How casually they'd said to each other, she won't mind. She has enough. I spent the next hour writing nothing, just staring at a blank document while my coffee cooled, while the world kept moving outside. Couples walked by holding hands, phones rang, a siren wailed in the distance. Ordinary life, unbroken. Mine suddenly wasn't. By evening, I was back in my apartment, a minimalist box on the 30th floor, filled with light and quiet. The skyline glowed beyond the windows, skyscrapers catching the last orange of sunset. I stood barefoot on the polished floor, scrolling through messages I hadn't answered. My mother's last one read, "Don't be cold about this, Claire. Family helps family. You know that." I put the phone face down on the counter. Family helps family. I'd helped, for years. With tuition, rent, bailouts, hospital bills, promises. Every time I gave, it was framed as love. Every time I asked for acknowledgement, it became guilt. I walked to the window, pressing my fingertips to the glass. The city shimmered below, small and unknowable. Somewhere out there, my sister was celebrating, her gown, her ballroom, her perfect evening lit by my foundation. My labor, my silence. And for the first time in years, I felt the stillness that comes before clarity. Not rage, not sorrow. Just decision. Tomorrow I would start pulling the threads. I didn't sleep that night. The city stayed awake with me, taxis carving lines of gold through the streets below, planes blinking red across a bruised sky. My apartment hummed with its usual silence, interrupted only by the ticking of the thermostat and the slow rhythm of my breathing. At 2:13 a.m., I sat on the floor with my laptop open, the only light in the room coming from its screen. I had 3 browser tabs open, my company's financial dashboard, my personal account statements, and the email thread with my family's accountant. Numbers were comforting. They didn't lie. The transactions were buried under a chain of misdirection, transferred from my private fund to a dormant account under Rowan Holdings, then dispersed in smaller payments to event vendors. It was clever, almost elegant in a way that made my stomach turn. My father's signature was there, electronic and tidy, like a signature on a thank you card. He must have done it through his old credentials, the ones I'd given him years ago, when I'd built the company and he wanted to help manage while I handled the clients. I never revoked his access. Maybe some part of me wanted to believe that sharing power with him meant being seen. Now it only made me look naive. By morning, I drafted a list of every withdrawal, every transfer, every name attached. $384,210.17 in total. That was what my silence had cost. At 6:45, I showered and dressed like any other day. Charcoal slacks, silk blouse, hair slicked back. The same precision I carried into every meeting, armor disguised as professionalism. By 8 o'clock, I was in the office again. The air smelled faintly of toner and citrus cleaner. My assistant, Olivia, greeted me with a smile that faltered when she saw my face. "Rough morning?" she asked softly. "Just early," I said. She handed me a folder of contracts, but I barely looked. My eyes caught the reflection of the skyline on the glass wall. The world outside looked so contained, as if even chaos respected boundaries. I wonder what that would feel like, to live without anyone crossing them. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. "Mom." This time I answered. "Claire, sweetheart," she began, her voice careful, rehearsed. "I was worried. You didn't reply yesterday. I was in meetings." "I know, honey. I know how busy you are. But I just wanted you to know. Your sister's wedding was beautiful. You'd have been so proud." I stared at the skyline. "I'm sure it was." Silence. Then too quickly. "We'll pay you back. Don't make this ugly." There it was, the defense disguised as kindness. The warning under the plea. "You used a corporate fund, Mom. Your father said it was fine. He said you'd understand. You're doing so well, Claire." I closed my eyes. "That's not the point." "It is the point," she insisted, her voice rising in that familiar honeyed tone that carried guilt like perfume. "You have so much, and she's starting a life. Family helps family. It's not about money, sweetheart. It's about love. Love, always their currency." "I have a meeting," I said, my tone even final. "We'll talk later." When I hung up, the silence felt dense, almost physical. I let it sit there between me and the window until the urge to explain faded. At noon, I scheduled a private meeting with James, our legal counsel. He'd worked with me long enough to know when to stay quiet. "What's wrong?" he asked once the door shut. "Family issue," I said. "But it's crossed into business territory." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Serious?" "Serious enough that I'll need a forensic audit discreetly. Starting from March." He didn't press, he just nodded. "Understood." When he left, I sat there for a long time, fingers resting on the desk, feeling the faint pulse of anger beneath the calm. It wasn't the kind that burned, it was the kind that crystallized, sharp and cold. That night I drove to the house I grew up in. It was smaller than I remembered. The siding was the same faded blue, the porch light still flickering. My mother opened the door before I could knock, surprise flickering into caution. "Claire," she said, smiling tightly. "You didn't say you were coming." "I didn't plan to." Inside, the air smelled of detergent and something sweet, her perfume layered over dust. On the mantel, there were framed photos from Lily's wedding. I wasn't in any of them. My father sat at the kitchen table, reading the paper like a man auditioning for normalcy. "Claire," he said without looking up. "You should have told us you'd come." I placed my bag on the counter. "You should have told me you were taking my money."
He finally looked up, frowning. "It wasn't your money."
"It was family funds. You've always said we're in this together." "Not legally," I said. My voice stayed calm, too calm. "Not since I removed you from the company registry 3 years ago."
He blinked, irritation flickering behind his eyes.
"You wouldn't even have that company if it weren't for me." There it was, the mythology. The rewrite of history that made my effort invisible. I built Rowan Analytics from my bedroom, coding through nights, living off vending machine coffee. He'd helped by taking meetings he didn't understand and calling it mentorship. "I know," I said quietly. "You've told that story before." My mother's hands twisted in her lap. "Claire, please. This isn't worth ruining things over." "Things are already ruined," I said. The conversation died there, No shouting, just the dull echo of finality. I walked to the hallway where the old family photos hung. There was one of me, aged 10, holding a science fair ribbon. My sister's trophies filled the rest of the wall. I realized then that I wasn't angry for the money. I was angry for how easily I'd been erased. When I left, the night air felt cleaner than it had in years. I sat in the car for a while, my hands on the steering wheel, watching the house through the windshield. The porch light flickered again, on, off, on, like an old habit refusing to die. That weekend, I closed every joint account, revoked access, changed passwords, contacted the bank. Each action felt like tightening a seam. They called, of course, first Mom, then Lily, then my father. Messages turned from gentle to pleading to sharp. You're overreacting. You're being cold. You're breaking this family apart. Maybe I was. Maybe it needed to break. One night I replayed my mother's last voicemail. You can't live without family, Claire. You'll see that someday. I deleted it, then blocked her number. For the first time in my adult life, the silence that followed didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like oxygen. In the weeks that followed, my life became quieter, not in sound, but in interference. The phone stopped buzzing. The weekend dinner stopped looming. Even my inbox looked cleaner, as if the world had finally stopped expecting an answer from me. But quiet has a texture. It isn't soft. It presses against you, waiting to see if you'll fill it with regret. Some mornings I almost did. At 6 a.m., I'd wake before the alarm, make coffee, and stand by the window of my apartment overlooking the river. The city stretched below, cranes, billboards, a skyline cut clean against the fog. I think of them, my mother's voice, my father's frown, Lily's perfect, glittering wedding photos. Then the thought would pass, replaced by something colder, clearer, a kind of mental exhale. Work helped. At Rowan Analytics, we were finalizing a contract with a real estate conglomerate, one of the largest I'd ever handled. My board was nervous, but I wasn't. Numbers were loyal. Systems obeyed logic. People didn't. One morning, while reviewing terms in the glass conference room, Olivia entered with a small envelope. It's from your parents, she said carefully. I stared at it, the handwriting neat, familiar. My mother's cursive. I didn't open it until midnight. Claire, we didn't mean to hurt you. You've always been stronger than the rest of us. We thought you could handle it. Your father's been unwell. Lily's worried. This distance isn't good for anyone. Come home for dinner. Let's talk like family. Love, Mom. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Love, as they defined it, was negotiation disguised as care. The next day, during a board meeting, I found myself distracted by the light on the table, the way it fractured through the glass water pitcher, scattering small rainbows across the documents. Beauty, I realized, often comes from refraction, from what bends, not what breaks. That afternoon, James entered my office. The audit's complete, he said, handing me a folder. It's clean. All misused funds are traceable. Nothing you can't reclaim. I nodded, flipping through the pages. Press charges? He asked. I looked out the window, the city mirrored in the glass, a ghost version of itself. No, I said finally. That's not the kind of justice I want. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. Understood. After he left, I leaned back in my chair. For years, I'd equated strength with endurance, the ability to hold everything, everyone, without breaking. But maybe strength was also knowing when to set something down. That weekend, I drove upstate. No destination, just motion. The highway stretched like a ribbon through fading gold trees. At a roadside diner, I ordered black coffee and sat by the window. A family at the next table laughed, A mother brushing crumbs from her son's cheek, a father teasing about the bill. It didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It just reminded me that love, in its best form, is simple. No bargains. No ledgers. By the third cup of coffee, I'd made a decision. When I returned to the city, I met with a philanthropic advisor. We spent hours discussing logistics, registration, funding. By the end of the week, the Hartwell Foundation for Ethical Business Practices existed, funded entirely from the reclaimed money. Its mission: to mentor young women starting companies, to teach them the one thing no one taught me, that boundaries are as essential as ambition. When the announcement went public, my phone lit up again. Dozens of messages, congratulations, requests, even a few apologies from people who had once called me cold. Then, inevitably, one from Lily. So proud of you, Claire. You've always been incredible. Mom and Dad are thrilled. Maybe we can all meet soon? I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, but because some doors close without slamming. They just stop opening. A week later, I was invited to a corporate charity gala downtown, one my family's company would also attend. I almost declined. Then I realized this was the moment the narrative would shift, not with words, but with presence. The ballroom was made of light and glass, the chandeliers reflecting like constellations. I wore black, simple, precise. No jewelry except for a thin silver bracelet, the only thing I'd kept from my mother. They saw me across the room. My father's smile faltered first, then my mother's expression hardened into polite surprise. Lily looked perfect, of course, a champagne dress, a husband beside her. I walked past them, calm, measured, like crossing a bridge I'd built myself. Later, as I stood by the terrace with a drink, my mother approached. "Claire," she began softly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I was invited," I said. She hesitated. "You've done well. The foundation." "It's beautiful. We're proud." "Thank you." "You know," she said after a pause, "your father misses you." I looked at her, really looked. The careful hair, the polite smile, the small tremor in her hand. "Maybe he misses the version of me that needed him," I said. Her lips parted, but no words came. When she turned away, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The night ended quietly. I left before the speeches, walking through the lobby's mirrored columns. My reflection followed, not fractured, just multiplied. Outside, the air was sharp with winter. Cars moved in streams of silver light. I pulled my coat tighter and exhaled. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone trying to prove she belonged. I just was. I moved apartments 2 months later. Not far, just across the river, to a glass-walled building that faced the skyline instead of the family estate. The realtor talked about the view, the gym, the proximity to the financial district. I nodded, but what sold me was the door. It closed cleanly. No echo, no drag. It locked with a single sound, one precise click. That was all I wanted. The movers came and went. By sunset, the place was nearly empty except for boxes labeled office, books, and kitchen. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, as though every object had to earn its way into this new life. When I reached the final box, I hesitated. It was marked personal. Inside, a handful of old photographs, a few birthday cards, the letter my mother had written. I sifted through them under the fading light, my fingers catching on the edges of memory. The last photo stopped me. Lily and me sitting on the front porch of our childhood home. I was 10, she was 8. I remember that day. Our mother had braided our hair alike. Our father had called from the steps for his girls. Back then, love still felt like a possibility. I placed the photo inside a drawer, not in anger but in acknowledgement. Some things don't need to be erased. They just need to be contained. By the time night fell, the apartment glowed faintly. the hum of the refrigerator, the soft blue of city lights through glass. I made tea and stood barefoot on the balcony. Below me, the city stretched, constant, anonymous, alive. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause. It comes in the shape of space, the room to think, to breathe, to exist without apology. The following week, the Hartwell Foundation hosted its first workshop. 20 young women filled the small conference hall. They came with notebooks, resumes, and the kind of energy I used to have before my ambition had to armor itself. When I spoke, I didn't mention betrayal or family. I talked about architecture, not of buildings, but of self. How structure defines endurance. How transparency isn't weakness. How control can coexist with grace. Afterward, a girl approached me, maybe 22, nervous, bright-eyed. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course. How do you know when it's time to stop trying to fix people?" I looked at her, saw the version of myself she didn't know she was becoming. "When their happiness always depends on your silence," I said, "that's when it's time." She nodded slowly, as if the words would take a while to settle. That night I returned home and stood before the balcony again. The river below shimmered like liquid glass. I thought about my mother's voice, my father's approval, Lily's wedding. None of it hurt anymore. It just existed, distant and contained, like light from another city. On the coffee table lay a small white envelope, another letter unopened. I had received it 2 days ago from my parents' address. This time I didn't even touch it. I placed it inside the drawer beside the photo. Some stories didn't need revisiting. They had already reached their quiet conclusion. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed a new proposal, a mentorship partnership with a tech incubator downtown. I made notes, sent emails, outlined goals. It was ordinary, productive, peaceful. Around midnight, I turned off the lights. The reflection in the glass window showed only me, no ghosts, no shadows, no echoes of someone waiting to be seen. In the darkness, I could still make out the faint glint of my bracelet, silver, minimal, reflecting a thread of moonlight. The city pulsed softly outside, anonymous, endless, full of lives unfolding. I closed my eyes and whispered, not to anyone in particular, "I'm home." And for the first time in years, I meant it.